Hi there, my name is Muhammad, and I'm the host of the Reconfigured Podcast, a show that explores the intersection of technology, culture, and society. We bring professionals to talk about their extended experience or discuss about a specific topic that might interest the audience. All of our episodes are available for free with no cost to the general public. Just a quick reminder that we are always on the lookout for interesting guests who can share their unique perspective on the topics we cover, or you can pitch in a new topic to discuss on the pod. Just reach out to us on social media or apply to our available opportunities posted on Polywork. So, welcome to the show. Today, I'm fortunate enough to be with Shane. Shane, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm so happy to be here. I'm Shane. I'm an engineering manager with over 14 years of experience in the industry. I've worked on the front end, on the back end, full stack, media, all sorts of different things, and I'm just excited to be here.
Yep. So, you're currently working at Algolia. What would you like to talk about Algolia and what they offer?
Yeah, sure. So Algolia is an AI search and discovery platform. It's a way for developers, application owners, site owners to add search to their site. So if you have an native iOS or Android application, a SaaS application, and you want site search, content discovery and recommendations, or something like enterprise and workplace search, like maybe you're trying to merge your wiki content with your Google Drive content and everything, and you want it to all be private, you can use Algolia to do that. I was actually, when I joined Algolia, I was surprised to learn that it's actually second only to Google in terms of the number of searches a year. I think we're in the trillions space. Just this last Black Friday, I know that we reached a peak load of around 100,000 queries per second. And I think we spiked up to like 5 or 6 billion search queries. So a lot of search, a lot of queries, a lot of data moving around. I work on the developer experience team, so I'm an engineering manager for that team. And one of the areas that I really like working on as well on search is the doc search program. So if you or anyone else has a site and you'd love to have free search, doc search is a great way to do that. If it's a technical blog or developer documentation of some kind, it's a great way to just get up and started if you don't want to manage your own search infrastructure. So that's a little bit about what I do and about Algolia as well.
So when we talk about developer experience, which means your job is to write documentations and to write certain SDKs, or how does it work?
Yeah. So at Algolia, developer experience is focused on uh, all the things that we can do to make developers who use Algolia and their lives easier. So documentation, as you mentioned, that's one area. So we're actually building out a new version of our documentation platform. Um, DocSearch is another program that we manage. That's a very developer focused initiative. We're also focused on our command line interface, the Algolia CLI. I know that a lot of SREs, reliability engineers in general, um, like working with the CLI and in your Bash interface to work with Algolia. And so this is something that we've developed. And we're also just recently managing our crawler. So the crawler is a way for you or anyone else who's coming to Algolia, if you want to bring data from your site into Algolia to make it searchable, we offer this as a way. We offer this as a solution. So if you have data in a bunch of different places, but you have it on your site, we can leverage the crawler to bring that all in. So as far as SDKs go, we do have a team that's also dedicated to that, and we work pretty closely with them to make sure that our documentation is up to speed and that we're kind of working in tandem to understand how we can improve that.
I want to talk about the whole crawler thing. So you said you would launch this crawler and it would crawl my website, let's say, and it would get the information. Can I also give the crawler, let's say, like a bunch of JSON files and it would parse them for me?
So if you have JSON files, One of the great, I think, things about Algolia is that it works with unstructured JSON out of the box. So if you have JSON files, you could use one of the SDKs to upload them directly and into an index, and you're good to go. You can leverage the crawler to map external data and to content that you're finding in nature, but the crawler is, I think, really geared more towards crawling documents like HTML, PDFs, and other like PDF like files as well.
Yeah. I'm going to move to a different topic, which is that before you worked at Algolia, you worked at LinkedIn for 8 years. Would you like to talk about your experience and the kind of adventures that you went through?
Yeah, sure. I can talk a bit about that. So back in 2013, I joined LinkedIn. Um, Moved to California when I was living in Colorado. Moved out there for it. It was a really like mine kind of really great experience when I remember first coming to the campus, which at the time there was like 4 buildings all around the cul-de-sac. It almost felt like in some cases I was like back in college again, just that vibe of people walking around between buildings. Instead of holding books and such, it's people holding laptops. Um, and just this very high energy around learning and doing. And so I had the uh, uh, opportunity to join the horizontal UI infrastructure team. And this was a team that was focused on building the UI libraries that would help power other products around LinkedIn. So you could think of it as um, like a bootstrap a type of library where it comes with all of the components, the buttons, form elements, interactive components as well, and that you could kind of piece together to build the site that you're looking to. And I joined, and at the time, this was around, I think mobile was becoming more and more ubiquitous. It was becoming more common, and LinkedIn hadn't quite reached its mobile moment, or when 50% of the traffic coming to LinkedIn came more on mobile than on desktop, but it was getting close. And so there was a big push to make sure that everything that we started to build was mobile friendly. And so my initial role was to help build the mobile UI library for web. And so building out those components so that we could help other teams enable that. And what was really interesting being in that role is it required that I work with other teams, that I hear about what's coming down the pipeline, what are they trying to build, um, what are the concerns they have as far as uh, components and such they need. So it gave me this bird's eye view of other product teams at LinkedIn. And so I felt really lucky kind of being in that position, because it was very eye opening to see all of that happen. And after about a year and a half on that team and working on UI infrastructure with a little bit of a pivot to work on some security initiatives as well, I really want to get more involved in the business side of building the product. So I was largely on like a very engineering focused team. There wasn't necessarily a product manager. We worked with design very closely because this was essentially a design library, but I wanted to get more involved with like the product part of it. And so one of my design partners was actually looking to make a transition as well, and they had moved over to the growth team. And talking with them, having built this relationship with them, they mentioned that there was a need for uh, more engineering talent on the team to help push some things forward. And critically, one of the things that I was very interested in learning about was the address book import feature. I think at this time, uh, LinkedIn was a bit infamous for having a address book import feature that I think some people had considered like a dark pattern in a way where, you're on mobile, you add your address book, and then it's not very clear that the next button that you hit is importing and sending invitations to everybody. And so I wanted to join in a way to kind of learn, what is there's anything that I can do as an individual to help make this experience better? Maybe there's already things that are in flight that I just am not aware of. And just understand, like, what are some of the business challenges that are kind of making this pressure of, hey, can we change this experience, or will it impact some kind of metrics? Ultimately, I was able to actually work with the same design partner to build a better version of the web experience that was clearer, that we felt was much clearer, that gave like different defaults. And what we found, and what I learned going through all these elements of growth, was the importance of understanding metrics and using that data to kind of help build your arguments, especially if it feels like it's going against the grain. You need data to be able to show that this is going in a positive direction. And so in this case, we were able to show that the new design was, while it was driving fewer total invitations, the quality of the connections as a result of those invitations were now higher, because the intuition there was that people were now selecting who they wanted to invite more. They were kind of spending maybe a little bit more time on that screen, especially for the folks coming through on web, which is where we were focused. So that was one key insight. The other key insight was there's a feature on LinkedIn called People You May Know. It's recommendations for who to connect with. And it's, I think, still one of the best in the industry as far as being able to surface and have that magical moment where within the first few rows you see, oh yeah, I actually do know that person. I'll send a connection invitation. So at the time there was two versions of the user interface for the People You May Know page. They looked identical. It was just the infrastructure backing them that was different. And so the version 1, which was a legacy version, harder to maintain, and version 2, which was on a newer version of architecture, there was a better separation of concerns, and it was easier to maintain. However, by the point that I had joined the team, this page was kind of stuck in this 50-50 mode, where 50% of traffic was going to version 1, 50% of traffic was going to version 2. And there was some resistance from the product side to move to version 2 fully, because there was a slight discrepancy in some of the metrics when it came to this idea of connections being and invitations being sent. And so it wasn't an easy to just say like, hey, we accept this and we're just going to ship the version 2 because we know it's a better technical decision, it's easier to maintain. There was a clear business impact that would have if we had it, even if it seemed like it was small. When you're dealing on the scale of millions and millions, it adds up. So this it required I had to sort of relearn all of the internals of how the V1 worked and how the V2 worked. And it took a decent amount of time. I would say maybe a month, maybe a little bit more, before I felt I had a good, really strong understanding of all the different nooks and crannies on V1 and V2. And what I found was that on V2, there was actually one mechanism that was working, but we just weren't tracking it correctly. There was an event that needed to be fired, so it tells a backend system that a user had taken a certain action in a very specific case. And it's whenever we showed a prompt to tell people like, hey, maybe you want to use address book import. And while that prompt was working on V2, it just wasn't being tracked appropriately. And so it was just causing some downstream effects. once we had fixed that, the metrics discrepancy was mitigated, and we were able to say, okay, now we can launch V2. I think the key thing there is just one, dealing with legacy code and migrations is really, really challenging. And two, spending time and having setting aside time to be able to build that in-depth understanding of how things work is super important. And so this is probably close to halfway through my LinkedIn journey at this point. After these projects, I had the opportunity. Someone had come up and said, hey, we're starting to further build out our engineering presence in the New York office, and we're building a new team. It's the video team. And my manager had actually brought it up, and just kind of offhandedly, and I thought about it for a week, and I decided, you know what? I'm going to do this. This sounds like an excellent opportunity. I'm going to raise my hand and say, I'm interested. And so my manager was a little bit surprised, but they were very supportive, and things were put in motion. And in 2016, I moved to New York and was the first web engineer on the video team. And it was at that point that it was a smaller team. It was almost like like a startup a little bit within the larger company, because we were isolated from a lot of the other big things that were happening at the time, such as a big rewrite happening with the LinkedIn applications. We were purely focused on, is video right for LinkedIn? And the hypothesis that we had was yes, but we had to kind of demonstrate that. And so working with a small team, product manager, an engineer on each platform, we built a lightweight version of a video app that we gave to a bunch of influencers or popular LinkedIn personalities. That was a video recording app called LinkedIn Record. And on our end, we also built the ability to play back video on the LinkedIn app as well as the web application. Being on the webside, what was challenging was we were in the middle of this migration between an old version of the entire LinkedIn website to a new version of the application using Ember.js. And so we had to build a system that would allow us to sort of be in both, because there was going to be a time when we launched this, and then the new version of the site was going to start gradually ramping out. So whatever we built had to work in both and also be maintainable somewhat within both, with the one engineering resource myself that we had at the time. So what we did was I leveraged we had an existing video playback functionality on LinkedIn, and it was simply a mechanism to load YouTube videos, embedded YouTube videos on the feed and play them back. We hooked into that and said, we're going to treat our videos essentially as another embeddable video. We'll treat it as an iframe, much as we are with YouTube. Use the same API, the same browser APIs that are being used to communicate with the YouTube videos, with our videos. So behind the scenes, we're using post message to communicate between the parent page and these iframes. And we basically built it as if this was another YouTube video, but just, we were loading the video on our end. And so using that mechanism, we were able to sort of build this video player that was self-contained within this iframe and worked on both the legacy site and the new site, because we had already built the functionality to deal with playing the YouTube videos. So we were able to kind of build that leverage. And so that allowed us to sort of get video out the door for web, and with the videos that were posted, validate that video was the future. And so that ultimately gave the team the green light to build up the team. We added more engineers. That was a time that I ended up switching as a staff engineer to an engineering manager and just building the team and going from there. And so it can definitely, there's more to go in there, but that's quite a bit about my LinkedIn journey.
But mostly you dealt with the shifting from legacy systems to newer systems.
Yeah, there was a lot of that, and I think that it's kind of a bit of a, I'd say it's almost a bit of a meme in, I think, in the engineering communities, that a lot of work tends to be in that realm of, it feels like you're moving from something old to new, but it's not just that move. Usually there's additional functionality that you're getting out of moving to something new. It could be a better developer experience as well as a better customer experience, better features, more things that are better for the business overall. And so a lot of decision going into that, but I feel like a lot of, especially at, I think, large and small companies, but even I would say more so maybe even on larger companies, you're not just purely building something new all the time and launching it. Sometimes you're dealing with these like sort of migrations from older systems to newer systems. And the hope is that you project enough of it that you can maintain those systems for a decent amount of time, 2 to 5 years, let's say. That it's something that exists for a long enough time that you can iterate on it to learn about the next generation of your customers or where you want to go.
Just want to ask about, you wanted to shift from just writing code to a certain business aspect, and you mentioned it before, where
Yeah.
you want to get more involved in the business.
Mhm.
As someone who writes code for a living, what's the incentive for me when I understand more of the business logic than just developing the code?
Great question. The incentive there is that you start to understand, if you can understand what the intent is behind a certain change, you can begin to make uh, better suggestions for the future, either for the architecture of what you're building or even better things for the user experience. Because as someone who is knee deep in the code, you have a very interesting perspective about what's possible and what isn't. And oftentimes thinking about, uh, okay, if the goal is to bring this metric and increase it, maybe there's a better way. There's a way that hasn't been considered yet. And by doing that, you make things kind of easier on yourself because maybe you find a simpler solution, or you find a way to improve the business even more than was expected. And that's a better reflection on your skills and capabilities as well. And so understanding the goal behind what you're working on, especially how it connects to the overall business goals, which are often tied to metrics, I think is critical.
I'm going to shift towards different things that after,
Yeah.
or actually before or after your LinkedIn story, which is you've also worked at Twitter, but before the Elon acquisition. Would you want to describe your experience during the transition of the period in Twitter's leadership? How did it impact the team's dynamic and all of that? And if you want to talk about your adventures there as well.
Yeah, sure. So I joined Twitter in 2021. After many years on at LinkedIn, I had made the decision that it was time for a change, and Twitter was a company that I'd really admired and been very interested in. Um, and so I started on the profile team. It was a team that was relatively new in terms of within the organizational structure. Um, and it was built because for a while the profile on Twitter hadn't been uh, iterated on a lot. There was no like singular owner behind it that was looking at it and saying, okay, how do we improve this experience, try new things? And so the team was established to do that, and I was coming in to lead one part of the team on account types. And one of the first account types that we were building toward was bot accounts. We wanted to make it very clear for users on Twitter to be able to distinguish between tweets that are coming from automated accounts and tweets that aren't. And so that was one of our first projects that we were building out. And I guess about 6 months into my tenure there, that's when Elon started making overtures about purchasing, investing in Twitter, then ultimately going through the whole purchase cycle and the back and forth there. And this was one of the first times in my career, and I think for many, where there was just a lot of unknowns. There was only so much that leadership at the company could say, because everything was kind of tied up in this deal. And there's, quite honestly, in hindsight, reading about everything, there wasn't a lot that that was known because of just the way that this deal had to be handled. So there are a lot of assumptions being made, and I think initially, you could, in the beginning of this time period, I would say the feeling towards this acquisition was probably a bell curve. You had people on one side that were very much super for it, and yeah, this is going to be exciting and new, and it's going to really push us forward. Most people were in the middle, where I think it was like, I'm kind of cautious about this. I'm not sure what to think of it. I'm going to just focus on my work and on there. And then there were people, and then at the other end, it's like, I'm not going to work for Elon. I don't want to do that, and such. And so, I think a lot of this initial time was kind of spent figuring out where do I personally stand? Where do each individual on their own figure out what is their level of risk tolerance? And I think that's where leadership, like the middle management, sort of came in to say, you have to do what's right for yourself. And that is what we echoed. Figure out what is your risk tolerance, what is, keeping your sanity in check in a way, and just being in touch with your feelings about how you want to grow, and is this the way you want to kind of move forward. And I think a lot of people had this wait and see approach. So I had started on Profile, and then for the last a few months of my tenure at Twitter, I had the honor of managing the Birdwatch and accessibility product teams. Birdwatch is now called Community Notes. But a lot of the work that I was doing as a manager during this transition period was really just continuity, keeping the lights on, managing our roadmap, our delivery workflow. Something very interesting about Birdwatch at the time was the way the team was structured within the company was very unique, in that it was largely, I would say, somewhat isolated from the trials and tribulations and changes and such that were happening with the rest of the organization. It was sort of focused on this core product and building out Birdwatch, making it the best that it can be. And the team had been given that trust and that free reign, I think, by leadership. And so it was interesting to come into a team and seeing slightly different norms and ways of working, and trying to help maintain that during this time of upheaval. But I think at the end of the day, work with what you know, be clear on your own aspirations and what you want to get out of the situation, and go from there. I definitely can talk more about that, but I think there's it was just such an interesting, nerve-wracking, and just challenging experience from both a individual level and as a manager, kind of thinking about how can I show up for a team knowing that there's so much uncertainty during this time. And how do you kind of keep the ship going? And is it right to do that given the circumstances? And so a lot of questions that came up that I think will that have helped kind of steer my own management philosophies going forward. And I think people will probably look back on that time. There'll be things maybe we'll read about and be able to learn from, and we'll come out stronger for it. So yeah, a bit of my time at Twitter there.
But I want to just give a little side note. Community notes is the best thing that I've ever seen on the platform. I'm just going to be realistic. Man, there's accounts on Twitter, just people like community notes roasting people. It's just amazing. It's just amazing.
Yeah, the community notes, I think knowing like the team behind it and a lot of the work, it was initially there was a very strong academic consortium that would meet, and you can actually go on the site today. I checked very recently. You can download the anonymized data. All the code for community notes is open source, because a lot of the vision for it was that this could be a system that other sites and applications leverage to help fight disinformation. There is a lot of the exact stats escape me at the moment, but there was at the time there was a paper that was released that showed that it did help lessen the spread of disinformation when a community note ultimately was approved and shown on something. But yeah, that's a little bit about my head.
But when you worked at LinkedIn, you worked at Algolia, and you worked at Twitter, what is the work environment and culture different between, let's say, a larger company like LinkedIn compared to a smaller company, let's say, like Algolia?
Yeah, I think culture at a company, there's multiple different levels to it. There's the larger company culture and what the company aspires to be. And then there's individual teams and what the day-to-day experience is like. I think at a larger company, you are more likely to experience those differences between different teams. So like one team, if there was like a survey result, it might say, oh, this is the best culture ever within the same company. And then another team will say, oh, we're having a lot of challenges. And even though it's the same company, it's because it's so large that a lot of these teams have their own norms that are established. This can happen at smaller companies too, but it's, I believe, in my opinion, less pronounced. There's just only so much that I think can develop when you have fewer people involved. And so I think at a smaller company, it's, again, all companies and such are different. So I'm kind of speaking from my experiences, but I think that there is a bit more opportunity potentially for, if you want to try different things, it can be easier because there's fewer people owning different things, or there's one person that owns a lot and they're looking to get help from it. And so if you want to try something new, oftentimes a smaller company can be a great way to wear multiple hats. But in that sense, I think culture can be more greatly affected as well at a smaller company, because the ripple effects of one person on a smaller team can be, I think, felt more than on a larger company. And that's for both, I think it's both positive and negative things. So that's, in general, a high level view of how I'd seen like work culture differentiates between company size. One other thing I'll add is I think also larger companies have, they just have a larger budget. There's just more money at disposal to try different things. And so in that sense, it can feel like it's, oh yeah, there's like unlimited possibilities and such. Whereas at smaller companies, you are being, you only have so much a budget for trying new things, and you really are really managing spend, more, especially as a manager. I think in a smaller company, kind of analyzing that much more. Um, and it, of course, again, my experiences depends on the team, but those are some of the things that I would highlight.
But also, there's some things that in a larger company you can always switch teams. So if you're in LinkedIn, you didn't like your team, you can shift to a different team that you might like, and you give a positive review about the company. But when you're in a smaller company, you don't have that much of flexibility.
Yeah, I think that in a smaller company, you have potentially, there are fewer like teams to switch to, because there's just, that's just the nature of it. There's few teams, but I do think that at a larger company, there's also can be more process involved in that kind of switch. There's a lot of um, uh, considerations at play with being able to sort of make a switch like that, or being able to focus and change direction. I think at a smaller company, there can be, even if you're not switching teams, you as an individual, I think, can focus on uh, different areas. It's much easier to kind of jump into, sometimes much easier to jump into like something else without needing to get approval in a way, and worry about like, oh, am I stepping on like someone else's toes?
Yeah. I'm going to move to a different question, which is,
Yeah,
can you share your journey from being a software developer to an engineering manager? What were some pivotal points during this transition?
sure. Um, Throughout my my career as a software developer, I had multiple managers who had, um, at some point during our one-on-ones, had brought up the idea of, hey, um, based on your performance and based on your uh, work and how you approach situations and how you do all these sorts of things, you could make a great manager. And is that something that you've considered? And at every conversation, I said, it's not something I want to do right now. I'm very focused on building up my technical skill set. And that's where I want to keep my focus for the time being. But it kept happening. It happened at my very, very first job. It happened at LinkedIn, multiple times. And ultimately, the pivotal moment that sort of shifted that was the need for an engineering manager. So when I had made that move to New York to work on the New York City engineering team, help build out video. Now that we approved video, we're building out the team. We started to hire more web engineers, and there were more people moving from the West Coast to the East Coast to kind of take on some of those roles. And so I went from being one of only two web engineers to now there being 8, 9, 10 web engineers in the office. And so I felt that there was a need for someone who could represent the needs of the web engineers, who could help develop the careers of those new joining the company and connect them with the rest of the company. Because by this point, I'm 4 or 5 years into my tenure, 3, 4, 5 years into my tenure. I have a lot of institutional knowledge. I know different people at the company, especially within the web engineering community at LinkedIn. And so I felt that if there was a time to make this transition, this is as good as time as any, because there is just an absolute need to have someone with that knowledge and also the desire to help foster those connections and growth. And so um, I, talked about it with my manager at the time, and they agreed, and they were like, They were glad to hear it, and we ultimately formed a video web engineering team that was focused on building video-related products on our web platforms. And it's it was a great the transition. I can get into that a bit, but uh, it was a great experience, challenging experience to go from being a uh, technical individual contributor to now officially being a people manager. And so part of that transition did involve kind of stepping into the role of an engineering manager without like the official title, and actually trying it out and seeing like, hey, is this a right fit for me? Do members of the team see me as a partner in their careers as an engineering manager, to kind of fill that role and that gap? And so before my title or anything officially changed, I was kind of already stepping into that role a bit, and that helped immensely.
But during your transition, there's certain pitfalls and things that you learned along the way. What kind of advice would you want to give to someone who, let's say myself, I'm a technical person, I want to become an engineering manager? What are the things that you would advise I do not fall into or take into consideration when starting out?
Yeah, I think there's a series of questions that I would encourage anyone considering management to ask themselves, and then I have some advice as well. Questions to ask yourself: would you enjoy one-on-ones and tailoring to each person on your team and being a partner or maybe even a sponsor in their career development? I think dealing with people and managing people, there's no set playbook. There's a lot of different learnings and inspiration out there to help with that, but it's not like code where there's a deterministic way of handling a situation. Every person is different, and you have to treat them as such. Um, are you okay with, and on that same note, are you okay with dealing with ambiguity when it comes to dealing with people? Again, they're human beings. We have aspirations, feelings, emotions. We have to be able to um, handle that in certain ways. Another one that I was trying to think of a way to phrase it. I think it was that I think of when it comes to being managers. It's, are you willing to put the needs of the company or your customer above yourself and maybe even sometimes your team? And I think that's a hard question to I think for some folks to answer, because it's hard to look at a situation that's happening with the company, for example, and say, you know what, this is the direction the company is moving in. Maybe we do have to shift projects. Maybe we do have to like put a pause on some things that people are really passionate about in order to kind of serve the greater good. And so being able to make those kinds of decisions can be really challenging. And so really thinking about, can you put yourself in that position where you have to kind of make those hard calls, is something that I would definitely ask yourself. Kind of related to some of my experiences, can you help foster a culture that ships software in the face of challenging times? There's not every day there's a billionaire buying a company, but thinking about when things aren't going well, how are you able to kind of build the energy and find a way to continue to deliver for customers? And if not, how do you handle that? Are you prepared to, give that maybe not so great news to your stakeholders or managers, customers, and so forth? The other one I would say to ask yourself is, are you comfortable delegating? Could you delegate something that, for example, could you delegate something that you're an expert at as an individual contributor? It may be a growth opportunity for somebody else in your team. Delegate that and not micromanage. I think it can be very difficult if you're someone who's an expert in a particular, say, skill set or subsystem. and you're essentially have to kind of hand off the reins. And maybe there's some things where it's like, oh, I know I would do this a certain way, but it's not the only way to do it, but maybe it's the better way. But you can't, you have to deal with those kinds of emotions and challenges of like, I don't want to micromanage this person because this is a growth opportunity for them to be able
But
to
also, but
growth.
here's the
Yeah.
thing. But when I say I know how to do it better, is it more of a biased thing because there's a chance that the other person's solution might not be good at the beginning, but better at a later stage than your solution?
It's absolutely a bias, and that's one of the key things to I think to recognize. When we say it's something is better, it's being able to relieve that ego and say, this is no, there's not just one solution for this particular challenge, um, and asking the questions to understand how this is going to better serve things in the future. And I think that for some people that can be challenging to kind of let go of. So that's something that a lot of, and again, a lot of these questions and advice, it's easier said than done. And so really introspecting and being like, can I do this, is something that I think is super important. Um, the other question I'd ask is, I think a lot of times in middle management, you may be taking flack from above in yourself in the organizational hierarchy, or below, like team members who are unhappy with the way something is going, processes and whatever. So are you prepared to be that kind of umbrella for your team and to turn those, either like absorb that or turn those kinds of flack into something better for the team? So I think that, those some questions I would ask. I think from the more the advice and thoughts perspective, I would say um, try to avoid what I've seen referred to as the squishy middle of middle management. I define it as something that's not quite responsible for either the plans, process, and people in a team, which I'll get into, and you're not quite responsible for the technical decisions and expertise in the team. So you're kind of like not, almost like a little bit responsible for everything, but not quite responsible for anything. Um, that's, I think, can actually lead to burnout. I think it can lead to just other challenges of not of that feeling of like inadequacy and such. Um, as a manager, you're going to be spending your time, I think, a lot on plans and process and people. What does that mean? Plans are around thinking about strategically for your team as well as your product or whatever it is that you're working on. Thinking about process. How do we get things done? Can we eliminate process where it makes sense? Are we adhering to, if there's any process that's a legal requirement, are we kind of following that and making sure we're not introducing new risks into the system? And then people. At the end of the day, you're a people manager, so you have to really care about the individuals on your team. I think those areas are where, as a manager, you're going to be spending most of your time. And so thinking about how you spend your time today, and if you want to spend your time on those things, and kind of comparing that and weighing that is, I think, an important part of the equation of deciding yourself to be a manager. Um, Other advice: builds professional relationships with other teams and other managers. I think it's very easy to become, um, kind of focused insularly on your team and say, okay, we're going to get this done. We're going to work on making my team the best it can be. But you can't always do it alone. I think that, especially at larger companies, um, there's a lot of dependencies. You want to be aware of changes that are happening so that as a manager, you can help prepare your team for either organizational changes, technical changes, um, things that could be coming down the pipeline in terms of work. And so having that awareness and finding where in your company, maybe there's already some processes in place. And if there's not, build them, find ways to connect with the managers and tech leads of other teams so that you can build that awareness of what's happening and bring and distill those insights to your own team. I think the last main advice I would give is, it may take some time if you do decide to step into the manager role. It may take some time to find the management style that works for you. And to that, I would say, think about the managers you've had in the past and what they've done well and what they haven't done well, and whether those are things that you are interested in building on. So, if anyone decides to step into the management role, know that you may not get it right off the bat, but it's something that you can work towards. You can shift your style. You can find what works for you. And if you do step into management, you can always, and you decide after a year or two or something that it's just not right, and you want to go back to keeping your skills sharp and being technical, you can do that. There is no law. There is no set thing in our career that says you have to follow this certain path once you enter it. So feel empowered to just take the career into your own hands and do what you feel is interesting to you and brings you energy and joy.
But if I want to downshift myself from an engineering manager to a lower position, not a lower position, but more of a technical position, can I claim the tech lead kind of position? Because I already know the bit about management, but I don't want to delve too much into management. I want to delve technical, but at the same time, a little bit of management in that sense.
Yeah, there is absolutely, you can go from being an engineering manager to being more of a tech lead, whether it's at the same company or a different company transition. I think that a lot of companies will appreciate the management experience and leadership experience that you have, especially stepping into more of an individual contributor role. There is a role out there, often also called the tech lead manager, which is it's kind of a hybrid. It's a bit of a dangerous role, I would say, because you want to make sure you're not jumping into a role and then you're getting like a team of 6 people and you're also responsible for the deep technical expertise that is expected of like a tech lead. Typically those roles are, some people have that capability and that's great, but typically for a tech lead manager role, you might have maybe a couple team members that you're a people manager for, and then you spend the other 50% of your time really focused on deep technical contributions. And that's another kind of if you look at it as like a Venn diagram, that's another space that someone who's interested in some aspects of management, maybe having like a small piece of that while still maintaining it. That could be another type of role that you could jump into. But again, something to just be very mindful of, depending on the company, that it isn't like a explosion of responsibilities. But all that to be said, yes, the short answer is yes, you can go from being an engineering manager to a tech lead if you want to. And I don't, to be very clear as well, it could actually be, it could be a horizontal move. It could be actually be a step up in responsibility, because maybe you're taking on a stronger, like a larger tech lead responsibility, like a senior staff engineering role, for example. So those are all possible. But I think what's important is somewhat to be able to make some of those transitions is keeping your skills sharp. And that's one of the challenging things I think about stepping into engineering manager role is building the time and space for yourself to keep those skills sharp so that you don't lose sight of the technical trends and expertise that are happening.
So like dedicate some time to write code on the side or learn a couple of things that are on the technical side so I'd be able to do them.
I think there's multiple ways of keeping your skills sharp. And I think that's when I was making the transition into management, and before I officially made the transition, I actually spoke with other managers. And if there was one thing that was consistent between all the managers that I spoke with, it was keeping your skills sharp is going to be one of the most challenging thing as a frontline manager, because it's not something that it's hard to build in the time for that. It's not like your core responsibility as an engineering manager to be making those types of technical contributions. So you have to find the ways to keep them sharp. And I think a few of the ways include still like performing and reading code reviews, even if you're not leaving comments on them, but still just being aware of here's the changes that are being made on your team and outside of your team. Trying new things, maybe on your own time. There's a lot of, for example, I'll give an example with over the last couple of years with the technology trends in generative AI. A lot of my core responsibilities weren't on generative AI, but it's an area that I wanted to explore, build more skills in. And so on the side, I would sort of build some small applications to help work with the OpenAI API, and build, my own chatbot or some other service to sort of build that skill set and see maybe there's something I can take from this experience and bring it into my current role. Maybe it'll impact the roadmap. Maybe I can learn a bit about it so that I can encourage others to do the same on the team. So this aspect of continuous learning doesn't necessarily stop whether you're an individual contributor or manager, but I think it becomes a little more challenging when you're a manager because it's just not your necessarily core responsibility. Another way I would, on some teams that I've managed where I would sort of kind of keep my skills sharp is every once in a while I would take on a non-critical path task. So something like deleting some old code or changing some strings, just so I can feel and experience what some of my engineers are experiencing when it comes to pulling down code, running the repository, running the service locally, making a change, making a pull request. How does that experience feel? It's important, though, to recognize, I think, as a manager, if you find yourself doing that more and more, like taking more and more of these small things on, that could be a sign of like maybe a dysfunction, or that you're just taking on too much as a team if you're kind of falling back on that as a crutch. So it's one of those things that you have to be mindful of, I think, as well, if you're an engineering manager especially of like larger teams.
Well, when managing the team, you mentioned about I don't have to micromanage people, and I don't have to tell every single person, hey, this is something that you need to do, or I have to give them a certain level of trust that I have to work with them. Would you like to share some insights on how you successfully grew a team from 5 people to 12 cross-functioning engineers who start doing things different than what they got used to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I first started managing a team of 5 web engineers, I would kind of classify my role a bit as like a player coach, where I have deep technical expertise in the web domain. I have the connections with the company, so I can help foster and direct a bit where we go, while also giving room to the engineers on the team to kind of spread their wings and build something new that we're trying to build on video. And so um, some of it is being aware, like, for example, in the process of building a new component, let's call it like a video upload component, we may, process may involve writing an RFC or a spec, just to sort of define, here's what we're building it, here's why, here's what's not in scope, and here's like all the kind of a little bit of research that we've done, and we'll time box that. And so that's something that I would give to the lead who's building that to drive. And as the engineering manager, I would help review that document and maybe ask, use the Socratic method of questioning, or just ask questions around, have we considered XYZ, or is it, just to refine the thinking a bit, but not necessarily providing, direct answer like, oh, you have to do it this way or that way. It's sort of like, one way of viewing this is sort of like you have like a porthole into the whole process of software development. You're kind of peeking in just to kind of make sure things are still moving smoothly, and that's what I view it as. And then, kind of giving them the free reign to kind of go and build that, and properly acknowledge them when the project comes to an end as well, making sure that they're receiving the feedback from other team members that they may have worked with, and so forth. So I think just building this process that works for you as a manager is important, and for the team. I think in then growing the team further from there, as individuals on the team become more experienced, both technically with the systems that they now own, and they become that go-to person for the service, it naturally sometimes lends itself into becoming the tech lead for that subsystem. And so the management sort of responsibilities for a person in that role becomes less of, I'm guiding you and I'm kind of checking the boxes of like, okay, yeah, you're moving the process along nicely, to sort of more higher level strategic thinking of, okay, now that you own this system, what's the technical roadmap for this, let's say this video upload component for the next year or two? What would you like to see built? And sort of giving them more freedom to think about, now that you have the deep technological expertise, are you now talking with the other teams to help build the roadmap to make this the best possible video upload component that it could be? Are there technical industry standards, conferences, anything that we can get involved in where we can share our learnings and also maybe gain some other learnings? And you can be as the tech lead of that system, you can be like the face of that, and continue to drive that. So once you get to that point, it's like you almost have staff engineers who are much more self-sufficient when it comes to understanding the roadmap, building out systems. They're thinking longer term. They have influence over more of the team and the surrounding team. And so managing more engineers or other managers becomes a possibility. You as a manager, I've now helped foster the situation that allows the individual to be a leader in their own right. And so I can now focus my attention on, helping also grow these other engineers on the team. I can help further scale our efforts and make this process that we have something that can now be scaled to more people. And so that kind of key piece is, I think, where you can start to think about growing the team from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8, and then ultimately at LinkedIn I ended up having 12 engineers reporting to me. And the only way that worked, like 12 is a lot to have for one manager, and the only way that worked is because many of the engineers of the team were now staff engineers. They were leaders of the systems and components that they were managing. And so there wasn't a need for me to be deeply in the weeds on every single little thing. They have the full trust and autonomy and skills and know-how, more so even than I do, to be able to take some of those subsystems and platform specific considerations, for example, web versus Android versus iOS, into play. And so my responsibility at that point is kind of shepherding all these different roadmaps together and advocating for the team across the company to make sure that everyone knows that this is what we're working on. If you're doing something with video or media in general, here's how, here's who to talk to, and how to build that out. So, um, to summarize all of that, I would say building, growing a team is about building other leaders. And whether they're individual contributor leaders or they end up becoming a manager themselves, if you can help build leaders out of the individuals in a team, that is what can allow you to scale and take on more responsibility.
But what if I'm in a remote situation? If, let's say, I'm dealing with a team remotely, how would I be able to manage remote teams efficiently in a productive and team cohesive way? Like, if we're in person, it's just very easy for me to deal, let's say, with you. But if I'm remote and if I'm in another country or I'm in another place, it might be a little bit difficult. How would you
Yeah.
manage that?
Yeah, remote is certainly brings a lot of challenges in its own right. Um, I think in terms of some strategies and aspects, there are different ways I look at it. One is, what support does the broader company have in place for managing remote employees? Often, I think really the only way remote can work is if there's, or at least work really well, is if there is top down buy in that this is the method of work that we are doing because it allows us to bring a wider talent pool into our company. It helps us with our customers and so forth. Like finding those are the reasons. And then, does the company have a support system in place? For example, have they established principles around communication in a remote setting? Um, is that something that as a individual team that we can tap into to help foster that culture, especially in a remote setting? Um, Managing a remote team, you know, it's there's differences and there's similarities to be in person. If you're in person, it can feel easier because it seems like, oh, I'm in the office. I can see this person right here that they're doing XYZ. But in a sense, you still have to have trust for them, and vice versa. And so in a remote setting, that trust, you still need to have that trust that their commitments are going to be met, that you're going to meet their commitments, in terms of, for example, their career growth. So a lot of that doesn't change. What does change is the communication. You can't just turn around and then say hi. You have to be very explicit and clear about how communication will be handled. When is it appropriate to have a synchronous meeting, call or phone call or what have you? And when is it appropriate to be using asynchronous methods of communication like chats like Slack, Microsoft Teams, um, writing documents to kind of foster your thinking and really shoring it up before like making a decision. Um, so there's making sure that those principles are in place and consistent for your team ultimately becomes very critical to being able to manage a remote team, both for oneself as the manager and as well as the team members. It can be very difficult if you're starting at a remote company and you're trying to find resources, who to talk to. Um, so it's critical to have the onboarding set up in such a way that people can self-serve in a way, and they have someone they know they can go to, whether that's yourself as a manager or another member of the team that can help connect them with those resources in the beginning. Um, so the other thing I would say is for managing remote teams is setting and it's maybe a bit counterintuitive, but setting a regular cadence for remote team members to be able to meet in person. So I think that it's hard to build. It can be very hard to build relationships on a remote setting, and I think when you're just over video all of the time or audio all of the time, um, it's it's nice, there's like another human at the end of the line, but there's something about every once in a while being able to really see a person that truly brings out their personality and their humanity, and you build shared experiences that make it easier to collaborate and work together in the future. So I think it's important for teams and companies, um, and this is my view, to have a regular cadence set up and make sure that's agreed upon from the outset. Like if it's once a year, the team from all over the world gets together to meet in person, um, or maybe it's once a quarter, or so forth. Um, I think all of that really matters. The last thing I'll say is that time zones are a huge challenge. If you have a team that is cross time zone, setting asynchronous communication principles is critical, um, because oftentimes there may only be a very small window of time where things overlap or are just or are nice enough, even if it's like a little bit before or after the end of a day for somebody, where you can come online and have a critical synchronous discussion or decision being made. And so having that clarity of how you communicate is super important. That's why a lot of teams, even if they're, I think the trend, and this is just my view observing what's happening, I think the trend is that, um, for remote or even hybrid, is that similar time zones are now becoming more of a thing, where keeping people like having at least like 4 hours of overlap or so forth, and kind of keeping within the same time zone for certain teams where you're doing that tight collaboration within the team, because sometimes you just need that synchronous time together to pair program, to work together on something that's really challenging. And so being able to have that opportunity becomes important. Um, Definitely not the only way things have been done. There are a couple of companies I can think of that do have, they have that full remote setup and it works really well for them. But I think it comes from just the fact that a lot of companies still are building that muscle, even to this day, even with everything having been remote previously during the height of the pandemic. I think there's just still a lot of challenges, like people getting into that mindset of working remote and thinking about these principles and adhering to them versus, hey, let's just get in person and hash this out. So some thoughts on remote and team cohesion.
But how can I foster a culture of growth and skill development within a team, even if, let's say, in a remote setup?
Great question. I think what stays the same, whether it's remote or not, is that the culture that you build within the team and the goals that you set are still the same. Like you're still thinking about and working with each individual to find out what it is that makes them tick. How are we going to build towards the career that they envision? Are there skills that they're looking to grow? And setting a goal around that. Whether you're remote or not remote, I don't think that changes. I think the challenge becomes, um, if the aspect of how a team or individual is trying to grow relies on another team or person that has a different set of principles that have been set up on a team in terms of communication, it becomes harder to find those points where you can say, okay, let's get together to collaborate. And so that's where, in my view, it comes in that the companies that have these remote setups really do need to set that kind of top-down view of, here's our perspective on how we collaborate and foster these connections in a remote setting, and not just sort of leave it to the whims of each individual team to kind of figure out on their own. Because I think that then can result in some disappointment, where maybe somebody's looking to grow in a certain way that involves somebody else on a different team, but you can never find a way to connect. It's just not working out, and that can foster some challenges of, how am I going to grow if I can't? There's this critical thing that I want to do, or this critical person that I want to interface with, and I can't do that because we don't have the same communication setup. So that's where I think, as managers, frontline, we have to be the ones also to step up and speak up and say, here, to our leadership teams as well, to say, we need some structure and expectations around how we communicate so that we can help foster those growth. And so, if the top level leadership's not doing it, then that's where the leadership from individual managers should come and shine through to build that to build that muscle, to build that communication between people.
And after I built this environment, and I fostered this really good, positive team environment, how do I know if this person is fit for my team or not? If this engineer or this person is good enough to be fit inside this team?
I think a lot of, hopefully, it's interviews are always very challenging, and if you're hiring new, it's, you try to get as many signals as possible to make the most informed decision as possible on both sides when hiring. But I think, as far as in general, the qualities that I would look for to determine if they're a good fit in the team are things like curiosity. Is there a demonstration of being curious about the systems that we're building, like going beyond the surface level to just dig a little bit deeper to understand why something works the way it does? Grit. I think that, especially in a remote setting, having this idea of grit and not giving up in the face of challenges, whether it's a technical challenge or a communication challenge, is very important. And just being able to push through that. And care is another aspect. It's actually one of Algolia's values, but care around how we communicate with others, keeping in mind other team members, the customers or stakeholders that are involved in whatever it is that we're building, and really, whether or not you're a manager, having just that humanity with people and being able to say, you know what, I'm going to help them. I see that somebody is asking on Slack that they don't know where to look for a particular code base. And I do know that, so I'm going to share that. Or even if I don't know that, I'm going to set aside time and help them to do that. And in the process, maybe I'll learn something as well.
But I'm going to shift towards a different question with a different context.
Sure.
With the rise of AI, we start seeing employees and managers utilizing tools like ChatGPT to get things done. What do you think these tools, let's say like ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot, transform the role of an engineering manager? And will I be able to evaluate a certain employee's performance based on utilizing those AI tools? So previously in the past, where you said about someone would write code and I would code review it and see it. Now, there are certain tools that does the code review for you. There's certain tools that would write almost perfect code, not 100%, but like almost. That's too good. How would I evaluate the person that I'm dealing with if he's using those tools, and what kind of these tools that makes my life a bit easier?
Yeah. So I think in terms of evaluating an employee's or team member's performance, I think it's it'll sound like a non-answer, but I think a lot stays the same. At the end of the day, you, on almost any team that I've been on, as a manager in general, evaluating what does someone get done and how do they get it done. In terms of how you get it done, how is that individual collaborating with others? Are they communicating effectively, frequently about changes in direction, changes in deadlines, needing to shift things versus kind of making things, things turning into a surprise, right at the 11th hour? Are you meeting your commitments? So if you make a commitment that say you're going to do something, are you doing that? And there's a popular phrase from a co-founder of LinkedIn, and it was trust is consistency over time. And I think since I've heard that, it's something that I feel is very important, that if you can build that trust, there's a lot that you can get done together. In terms of evaluating that performance, I think that there's not much that changes with AI tools. Like if you're using an AI tool, the thing that I'm going to be looking at is it ultimately in compliance with the broader company's system? So, some companies may not have policies on it yet. Some companies may have explicit policies on using those tools. So that's the level at which I would kind of look at it. And if you're using something like GitHub Copilot and it's, like approved, and we're using it and it's helping us get things done, it's helping you get things done, I think that's all the better. I think especially as an engineering manager, the way I see the role shifting is it could actually help engineering managers get certain things done where previously it would not be possible. I can I can speak to my own experience where, as an engineering manager, can be a lot of context switching. You're jumping from meeting to meeting, one-on-ones. You don't have a lot of time in between things to just try something out. I think some of these AI tools actually can really help with that. If it's maybe you wanted to write a script to help pull some data, previously something that may have taken, an hour of focused effort now is on the order of minutes, because you can describe what you need and get the script and maybe tweak it a bit to have it work. And then you're able to serve a need that you previously didn't have before. And so I see in some respects, this is just my projection, but I do think that there may be a bit of a flattening in like the organizational structure of companies as a result. If once this becomes more and more ubiquitous for engineering managers and for managers in general, because there's just more that you may be able to get done. And you can focus now more of where you may have had to spend more time on building things, you now can focus more on the people. And that's something I don't think generative AI has really cracked yet. You still need the humanity of someone involved there, and I think that's where managers can really continue to have value, to helping shape the direction of people's careers and connecting that to the overall goals of the company. But to bring it back to individual employees and individual team members and their performance, those usage of those tools, I think, can only help in terms of productivity as long as it's allowed. And I see it as like a rising tide lifts all boats. If you learn how to use something like GitHub Copilot and it makes you feel more productive, then that's great. Now we can, it's not going to change necessarily how you'd evaluate it. If you're still a jerk, if you're a jerk to your team members and by getting things done, that's, you'll be evaluated whether or not you're using generative AI to get things done. I respect. So I think what you get done and how you get done still be evaluated on that. And whether or not generative AI is used is, for me, less of a question of, oh, you use this tool to help you versus, oh, as long as it's allowed, why not? It can help us refine our thinking and ultimately potentially get more done.
Or just remove the usual day-to-day tasks that I don't have to waste my time on.
Absolutely. I think it's, I could already see some aspects, even outside of like the technical aspects, like GitHub Copilot to help write code in a way. I think that generative AI can also help in a bit in terms of, imagine you're out for a couple of weeks and you're looking to get back up to speed. Summarizing conversations and pointing you, or sometimes summaries are getting better and better these days, but at least pointing you to like the right places to focus and saying, okay, there were 10 conversations about project A, and here's a summary of some of the decisions that were made. There's things like that I think can help speed up getting up to speed on a project, or dealing with some of the challenges of communication. And in that example of being away for a while, I think just also make it so that people feel comfortable taking time off too, which I think is very important for the health of or individuals and for the team and for a company to be able to take vacation and not feel that like inkling of pressure of, oh no, I'm gonna come back to work and there's gonna be this whole pile of stuff I have to deal with. And so I think Gen AI could help with that a bit.
I'm going to move to a different question, which is you joined New York City's NYC's Tech in Residence program to teach front end to College of Staten Island students. What motivated you to join, and how has teaching impacted your professional perspective? And here's the thing that I always ask: does academia prepare you to actually enter the market? There's a lot of debate on whether academia actually does prepare you or not.
Yeah, I think so. So a bit about the Tech in Residence program. I was inspired to join for a couple of reasons. One was a senior staff engineer at the company in the New York office. Um, he had actually kind of led the way in this, and he was the first person to from the company to teach a course and be part of the program. And after he had done it, it's an ambition that he also had always had, and this was just like the right opportunity. He got the go ahead from leadership to move forward with it. And so he did a class for a semester, and then he came back and shared his experience. And it was a bit of like a recruitment tool to see if any other folks would join and whatnot. But I was actually very inspired by it because as someone, I have a college education, but I didn't explicitly study computer science. A lot of my knowledge and skills have been self-taught from the time I was a kid to now. And so in that respect, I didn't have a formal education around some of those aspects. And so there were some moments in my career where having the right person who answered the right question or who helped mentor me or helped guide me to a resource, I feel really helped me on my career. And I felt that this was an opportunity where I could maybe help that for somebody else, pay it forward. And so I, again, raised my hand, say, hey, I'll take this opportunity. And for one semester, I developed a curriculum around just building a real web application using some of the technologies we used at LinkedIn. In this case, particularly Ember.js, and we mixed in some other things like GraphQL as well. And it's, I think what the whole goal of the course as well was to help build something real, so that maybe it's a way for people to say like, hey, is the web development something that software development something that I want to be an aspect of? Maybe there are a lot of people in the course who and are in the programs that, oh, I want to be an engineer, but I'm not sure what kind of engineer I want to be. And I felt that doing like a real building something real could help with that. And then the other aspect is add it to your portfolio. This could be something that you could add to your portfolio. So when you go seek out internships or full-time jobs, that this is something that you can show and you can talk about how you built it, how you worked with another team, how you worked with a team, how you learn new technologies. And this can be like a store part of the story that you tell to hopefully get your foot in the door at a company. And one of the unique things about this course was that we got to host the course inside of the LinkedIn office. And so students, they actually, some of them traveled actually very far, but they came into the office, they got to experience some of the amenities and see, kind of observe what people are doing in an office setting. And I think I'm hopeful that that sort of helped kind of, I think one of the things that academia maybe doesn't prepare you for is like, what is an office setting like? If you haven't been in one before, it's different. It's, you're not sitting in a classroom or even in a lab. It's meeting rooms and maybe some offices, maybe some cubicle type areas, and how you behave in that certain area. That's all I think new. And so I think having the class in that setting is something that I felt was very unique, and I'm grateful that we were able to do that. I think in terms of how teaching impacted my perspective, I think it it showed that how much patience is an important quality to have. Um, and I think for both teacher and student, sometimes, and this happens in the real world on real in the job, you come across a problem and you're just banging your head against it, trying to figure out, how do I solve this programming challenge? How do I get past this? And so that's where that idea of grit comes into play. But knowing that you have the problem solving ability, that you can build this, and that you've done it in the past with other subjects, and that you can get through this. I think that's impacted my perspective in a way that, people come from so many, like you hear it, you hear this, like people come from different backgrounds, they have different circumstances, different educational backgrounds. We hear this said over and over again, but I think it's until you practice it that you really start to build this true empathy for how to navigate these situations. And I think in terms of how does academia prepare, I think, well, that's was one of the reasons that this program existed, and why the City University of New York and the City of New York put together this program, is because there was this disconnect between what was taught in college and industry, people in the industry saying like, oh, students aren't really prepared for some of the aspects of what's there. And so some of the gaps that I think that are captured by programs like these are building like specific technical proficiency in like the latest and greatest of what companies are doing right now. I think some of the skills that also come up, that I hear often, are just general problem solving skills, whether it's technical or not. Like being able to solve a problem, I think, is at the core of engineering. And so that's something that I think sometimes you may not get from a course on the theory of computer science or something. I think some other critical things I would point to are that I came across a lot, and in some of the sessions that I have to this day with aspects of the program that I'll share, are the ability to debug something is something that I think isn't, whether it's a boot camp or a college program, I think that's something that has been lacking. And so finding either the resources to build that expertise on debugging, or just building and trying and running into problems and figuring out, how do I solve this technical challenge and how do I debug this challenge, I think is a critical skill. And I think overall, this idea of flexibility and adapting to change is something that the industry is always moving. There's always going to be something. I mean, this generative AI stuff is really shifting how we work in pretty radical ways pretty quickly. And so something to maintain is that, I think that academia can prepare you for, is that learner's mindset of, always be learning, be humble about what you know and what you don't know, and be confident that you have the capabilities to learn, and to always be learning. And so adapting to that and adapting to changing circumstances within the workplace, I think building that resiliency is something that may not come through in a traditional academic setting. And if one feels that maybe you haven't had that kind of adversity yet in dealing with changes and challenges, finding those circumstances and building that muscle, I think, is very important. So I think the one best way to do that is to build, and try building. If you see something that you like, try building a copy of it and seeing like, okay, can I build something like this? How would I get started? Let's start from the ground up and see how far we can get. That's something that to this day, I when I can find the time, I do that in order to help build my understanding of certain concepts or technologies.
I always end the podcast with a mental health question. It's always what I always do. Have you ever faced burnout or imposter syndrome? And if you did, then what do you do to resolve towards them?
Yes, absolutely. I faced both. My first experience with imposter syndrome was when I was first approached about the opportunity at LinkedIn. So this was in 2012. I was just a couple of years out of college working at my first job in Colorado. And I received a message from LinkedIn about LinkedIn uh, and a web developer opportunity. And I didn't even, I messaged back. I didn't even get on the phone. I was thinking to myself, like, how could a Silicon Valley company be reaching out to me, someone who doesn't have this traditional computer science education, um, who's just like a couple years into my role? Like, I'm surely they're doing some very advanced stuff, and if I even pick up the phone, it would be so embarrassing for me, and I'll feel so bad. And so I told them like, oh, I'm not interested right now. Like just thinking like I can't even do this. I was very lucky. They reached out again in like 6 months. It's like, hey, are you ready now? Like, let's chat. So I decided, okay, I'll take the call. I just have to swallow my pride, and I'll just do this and just see what happens. And I ended up going through the entire process, the phone interview, and what built my confidence was like, oh wow, I was actually able to answer these questions, most of them. And then when I went to the in-person interview, which I was like, oh, this whole panel interview, I've go through like 4 or 5 sessions with different people rotating in and out. I have no idea what to expect. But I was able to have conversations and answer the questions. And for things that I didn't know, I was very clear and honest about, but it was a very cordial and good experience. And I came out of the interview feeling like, wow, here I was putting the, Silicon Valley on a pedestal of, this is like the top tier, and they're doing things I couldn't even comprehend. And I came out of the interview experience thinking like, wow, I actually, even if I don't get this role, I know my stuff. I know like the things that I'm doing are technical, like the technical stuff that I'm doing on web in the web development domain. Um, this is working. Like I'm doing good. Like the fact that I was able to kind of do this, and that, like, getting that kind of like positive boost just from doing it, um, was great. And since then, I honestly believe that doing interviews is a great way to kind of keep you humble and keep your skills sharp. Even if it doesn't go well, it's something that, it's just like anything. Interviewing is a skill, and doing that over and over again, even if you're super comfortable in your role, you're happy about your growth, you're not looking to make a move. Um, Even just doing a practice session with a friend or something is a great way to just make sure you kind of keep that up. And but in any case, that situation, it it kind of it kind of blew the blinders off of the imposter syndrome. I was like, oh wow, I actually know what I'm doing. Ultimately, I did get the role, and it was a kind of a life changing experience for me. So all that to say, don't try not to let imposter syndrome prevent you from taking on other new opportunities. I think that you may surprise yourself with the capabilities that you have, and it's just another way of growth. In terms of burnout, I have definitely experienced this in my career. Um, I would say most recently it was probably in the last 6 months of my time that I was at LinkedIn, and I didn't realize. I think critical. I didn't realize it was burnout at the time. I just thought, okay, I'm gonna work through this. I'm like, uh, really challenging situations. A lot of work on my plate. I'm constantly working. Um, I'm not, I'm at home. When I'm at home, I'm not really present, like with my wife. I'm just constantly thinking about work. And um, slowly it like takes away at your health, your physical health as well, your mental health. You don't realize how it just sort of creeps up, and it starts to pull away at you. And it wasn't until I made like the transition away from the role, and I looked back and I said, wow, I was a totally different person. I wasn't setting boundaries for myself. Um, I I wasn't like taking care of my own like physical health from a diet and exercise point of view. It was just work, work, work. And uh, since then, I've realized, and it's something I am very mindful also of as a manager, with my team members as well, is looking out for those signs and hopefully making it to the point where you no one feels like they end up looking back 6 months like, oh yeah, I was burnt out. I was not as present in my daily life, and it was just affecting how I felt. And am lucky that I had a partner, my wife, who recognized that I was feeling that way, and that I was, I was just had a different demeanor. And it wasn't until I made a transition and like set and said, I'm going to set these boundaries and make sure I make my health a priority, first and foremost. And then within my role, I'm going to make sure we have very explicit expectations of, here's what we're working towards, and here's what we're expected to do, so that things aren't as ambiguous. and that we're working towards things that are important. I think another aspect of burnout is you feel like you're toiling away and it doesn't feel like it's for a greater purpose, or maybe you think it is, but nobody else does. And so it's like, oh, what am I doing here? I'm just like putting in all this effort and I don't feel like it's having that positive impact that I'm looking for. So that was my experience with burnout. And I think that just setting boundaries, setting very clear expectations, and giving yourself periods of rest, even if you feel like you don't need it, I honestly believe you need it. Everyone needs it. Make sure you're getting the rest and the sleep that you deserve. And from there, since then, I haven't experienced those feelings again. And I think that having gone through it once, I'm very much present in saying, like, I do not want to go through that again, and I'm going to make sure to keep making my health a priority as well.
Thank you so much for listening to the episode. If you liked it, then feel free to watch our previous episodes, and feel free to follow us on social media and rate us on your favorite podcast app of choice.